Don't touch my table. The words cut clean through the soft jazz and low conversation, sharper than the clink of silverware or the hum of the chandelier lights above. And for a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Richard Coleman leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk pulling at the corner of his lips while the glass of red wine tipped, slipped, and shattered against the polished marble floor, the deep crimson spreading outward like a slow, deliberate stain. Ava Johnson froze for half a second, just half, before instinct carried her down to her knees, the fabric of her uniform brushing against the cool surface as she reached for the broken shards with careful fingers that had learned long ago how to move without trembling even when eyes were on her. And there were eyes now, dozens of them, watching, measuring, waiting. The overhead light caught in the fractured glass, scattering thin lines of gold across her hands as she gathered the pieces, her breathing steady, her posture composed. As if the moment hadn't tried to reduce her to something smaller than she was, Richard chuckled softly, not loud, not explosive, just enough to ripple through the nearby tables like a quiet signal that it was acceptable to look down, to dismiss, to assume, and a few people did, exchanging glances, subtle smiles, the unspoken agreement of status settling comfortably in the air. Ava didn't look up at first, not until her fingers paused over a thin, almost invisible sliver near the edge of the table, her gaze shifting, not to him, but to the documents laid neatly beside his untouched steak, crisp white pages, black ink, the kind of paperwork that didn't belong in a place filled with candlelight and polished glass. Something in the layout caught her attention, not curiosity, something deeper, a recognition that flickered behind her calm expression, quick but undeniable, like a memory brushing against the present. She lifted the last piece of glass, placed it gently onto the tray, then rose to her feet with a quiet grace that didn't ask for permission, her eyes finally meeting his, not challenging, not submissive, just steady. Richard's smirk lingered, confident, practiced, the kind that came from years of being the one who decided outcomes before anyone else had even realized there was a decision to be made. The air between them tightened, invisible but heavy, as Ava glanced once more at the papers, then back at him, her voice soft, controlled, yet somehow cutting through the space with more precision than his earlier command. "Sir, you might want to look at that clause again." And for a brief second, it almost sounded like concern rather than defiance, which made it land harder, stranger, enough to shift something unseen beneath the surface of the room, as the faint sound of a chair moving somewhere in the background broke the stillness, and the first crack in certainty began to form. The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have, as if the room itself was deciding whether to dismiss them or listen, and for a moment no one moved, not the servers gliding between tables, not the couple mid-conversation 2 booths over, not even Richard Coleman, whose expression shifted just slightly, the confidence in his eyes flickering with something that looked almost like irritation rather than doubt. He leaned forward, one hand resting casually near the edge of the document, fingers tapping once against the paper as if to remind everyone, including himself, that this was his domain, his decision, his world, and whatever had just been said did not belong in it. "You are giving legal advice now?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, carrying just enough amusement to invite the room to laugh with him again, and a few did, quietly, politely, eager to stay aligned with the gravity of his presence. Ava did not respond immediately, her hands now still at her sides, the faint reflection of the chandelier catching in her eyes as she held his gaze without pushing against it, without retreating from it either, existing in that narrow space where most people would shrink, but she remained. The faint scent of wine lingered in the air, mixing with the sharper note of polished wood and citrus from the freshly cleaned table nearby, grounding the moment in something real while everything else felt suspended. "No, sir," she said. Finally, her tone even, almost gentle, "just suggesting you take another look before you sign." And the simplicity of it, the absence of challenge, made it harder to dismiss, harder to reduce to something insignificant. Richard's jaw tightened just enough to be noticed by the man seated across from him, his business partner shifting slightly in his chair, eyes flicking down to the document as if pulled by an instinct he did not fully trust, while the attorney beside him adjusted his glasses and leaned closer, scanning the page with a focus that had not been there moments ago. The subtle shift in energy spread outward, quiet but undeniable, like a current moving beneath still water, and Ava felt it without needing to see it, her attention already returning to the tray in her hand, the broken glass now collected, the spill contained, her role technically complete, yet her presence still anchoring the moment. A server passed behind her, hesitating just slightly before continuing on, sensing something different in the air but not understanding what. Richard exhaled slowly, leaning back again as if reclaiming the space, his confidence rebuilding piece by piece. "I think I will rely on my legal team," he said, the faint edge in his voice sharper now, more deliberate, but he did not reach for the pen, not yet, and that hesitation, barely a second long, did not go unnoticed. Ava nodded once, a small, respectful motion, then turned as if to leave, her steps measured, unhurried, each one echoing softly against the marble floor. But just before she moved out of reach of the table, the attorney's voice broke through, quieter than expected, almost uncertain. "Mr. Coleman, give me a second." And in that single request, something shifted again, more clearly this time, as the certainty that had filled the room began to thin, replaced by a growing awareness that the moment was not as simple as it had first appeared. The request did not sound urgent, but it carried weight, the kind that pulled attention without raising volume, and Richard's fingers, which had been resting near the pen, paused just short of closing around it as he turned slightly toward his attorney, the faint confidence in his posture tightening rather than relaxing. The attorney leaned closer to the document, his brow drawing in as his eyes moved line by line with a precision that had not been necessary moments ago. The ambient noise of the restaurant slowly returning in fragments, a fork touching a plate, a quiet laugh from across the room, the low hum of conversation attempting to resume as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the table at the center of it all remained still, suspended in a thinner, more fragile silence. Ava had not walked far, only a few steps away, but she felt the shift behind her, subtle but undeniable, the way the air changes before a storm fully forms, and she slowed without turning, her grip steady on the tray, her shoulders relaxed, as if she had already accepted whatever outcome would follow. Behind her, the attorney's fingers stopped on a single line, then moved back, reading it again, slower this time, the corners of his mouth tightening as he adjusted his glasses once more, buying himself a second that did not quite exist. Richard noticed it, the hesitation, the second look, and something in his expression sharpened, not yet concern, but no longer casual dismissal either. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of the earlier amusement, and the question did not echo outward this time. It stayed contained, directed, controlled. The attorney exhaled through his nose, a small, measured breath, then glanced up, not fully, meeting Richard's eyes, which was unusual, enough to register as a detail that did not belong. "It is structured differently than I expected," he said carefully, his tone neutral but carrying a weight that had not been there before, and that was enough to draw the attention of the partner across the table again, who leaned in slightly, his chair giving a soft sound against the floor. Richard's jaw set, the muscles tightening just beneath the surface as he reached for the document himself. Pulling it closer, his movements deliberate, controlled, as if speed might suggest uncertainty, and he began to scan the page, not as a casual review, but with focus now, real focus, the kind reserved for moments when something might actually be at stake. The lighting above cast a clean glow across the paper, highlighting the neat columns of text, the legal phrasing that looked solid, reliable, unshakable at first glance. Yet the longer he looked, the more his eyes slowed, catching on a phrase, then another, the meaning shifting not in what was written, but in how it connected. Ava remained where she was, her back still turned, but her attention anchored behind her, not out of curiosity, but out of a quiet certainty, the kind that does not demand recognition to exist. A server passed by again, more cautiously this time, sensing the tension but not interrupting it, while the faint music overhead continued as if it belonged to a different room entirely. Richard's hand stilled on the page, the pen now resting untouched beside his plate, and for the first time since he had sat down, The control he carried so easily seemed to hesitate, just slightly, just enough to be felt, not announced, and in that hesitation, the balance of the moment shifted again, more clearly now, as the truth he had dismissed began to surface, not loudly, but with a quiet, undeniable weight. Richard's eyes stopped moving, not because he had finished reading, but because something inside the text had stopped him, a single line that looked ordinary at first glance now pulling at the edges of everything around it. And he read it again, slower this time, the words reshaping themselves into something far less harmless than they had appeared just minutes ago. Across from him, his partner leaned forward, trying to read the shift in his expression more than the document itself, while the attorney adjusted his posture, no longer relaxed, no longer certain, his fingers resting lightly on the table as if ready to point, to explain, or to correct. The air tightened again, not with noise, but with attention, a quiet gravity forming around the table as if the rest of the restaurant had faded just a step further into the background. Richard turned the page slightly, angling it toward the light, his jaw setting as his thumb traced the margin near the clause Ava had noticed, the legal phrasing clean, polished, deliberately layered in a way that rewarded confidence and punished assumption. He exhaled slowly, not a sigh, not frustration, but something more controlled, more contained, the kind of breath taken when recalculating, when shifting from certainty into analysis. "Explain this," he said, his voice no longer carrying amusement, directed now at his attorney, who leaned in immediately, following the line with careful precision, his expression tightening with each second that passed. "It appears standard," the attorney began, but his voice did not fully commit to the statement, the hesitation threading through it like a flaw that could not be ignored, and Richard's eyes flicked up sharply, catching it, holding it, not allowing it to pass unnoticed. "Appears," he repeated, the single word landing heavier than any raised tone could have, and the attorney paused, recalibrating, scanning again, slower, deeper, until the structure beneath the language began to surface, the subtle shift of responsibility buried within layers of formal wording revealing itself not as protection, but as exposure. Ava stood a few steps away, her posture unchanged, her attention quiet, not seeking acknowledgement, not waiting for validation, simply present in the aftermath of what she had already set into motion. A faint reflection from the glass panels along the wall caught her silhouette, still, composed. As the tension behind her continued to build, Richard leaned back slightly, but not in comfort. In distance, creating space between himself and the document, as if seeing it from a different angle might confirm what he was beginning to understand. And for the first time, the confidence that had filled his movements earlier did not return immediately. Instead, there was a pause, a recalibration, his gaze dropping once more to the clause, then lifting toward his attorney, then back again. The cycle repeating as the realization settled in layers rather than all at once. "If this is interpreted the way I think it is," the attorney said quietly, his voice trailing just enough to leave the conclusion unspoken, yet fully understood, and Richard did not respond right away, his fingers resting near the edge of the paper, not touching it, not turning it, simply hovering as if the act of moving it again might confirm something he was not ready to accept. The faint hum of conversation in the restaurant continued to rebuild around them, unaware, detached, but at the center of it all, the moment had shifted completely, no longer about status, no longer about control, but about something far more precise, far more fragile, the recognition that certainty had been misplaced, and that the person who had seen it first had not been the one anyone expected. The silence did not break all at once, it fractured slowly, like something under pressure finally beginning to give, and Richard felt it before anyone said a word, the weight of the realization settling deeper with every second he remained still. His fingers finally touched the page again, not with the casual confidence from before, but with intention now, tracing the line as if confirming it would not change under a second look. Yet it did not. It stayed exactly the same, precise and unforgiving. Across from him, his partner shifted again, this time less subtle, his chair scraping lightly against the floor as he leaned closer, reading over Richard's shoulder, his eyes narrowing as the structure revealed itself more clearly. The implication no longer abstract, but immediate, measurable, real. That shifts the liability. The partner said quietly, not as a question, not even fully as a statement, but as something in between, something that needed to be said aloud to exist. Fully in the room. The attorney did not answer right away, which in itself was an answer, his usual certainty replaced by a careful, almost reluctant acknowledgement, his gaze still locked on the document, as if searching for a way to reframe it, to contain it, to explain it into something less dangerous. Richard leaned back slowly, the chair supporting him but not grounding him, his eyes lifting from the page and moving across the table, not seeing the plates, not seeing the glasses, but seeing. The moment he had almost sealed with a signature, the decision that had been seconds away from becoming irreversible. The faint hum of the restaurant returned. More fully now, but it sounded distant, like it belonged to a different space, disconnected from the quiet tension that still held his table in place. Ava remained near the edge of the room, not hidden, not highlighted, simply there, her presence steady, her role in the moment already complete whether anyone acknowledged it or not. A server approached cautiously, pausing just a few feet away as if unsure whether to interrupt, then quietly stepping back, sensing that something more important than service was unfolding. Richard's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition, a controlled recalibration of everything he had assumed just minutes earlier. And when he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier edge entirely, replaced by something sharper, more focused. "How did we miss this?" he asked, not directing the question at any one person, yet it landed squarely on the attorney, whose shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly as he straightened. "It is embedded," the attorney replied carefully, choosing each word with precision, layered under standard language, designed to pass a surface review. And that explanation, while technically sufficient, did not restore what had been lost, did not return the certainty that had filled the table before. Richard exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting again, this time past the document, past his team, landing briefly on Ava without fully turning his head. The acknowledgement subtle but unmistakable, and in that brief connection, something shifted again, not in power, but in understanding, the recognition that the person he had dismissed had seen what his entire team had overlooked. He did not call out to her, not yet, but his attention did not leave her completely either, held there by something quieter than pride, something closer to awareness, as the moment continued to settle around them, heavier now, more defined, no longer uncertain, but not yet resolved. The moment stretched, not forward, but outward, like time itself had slowed just enough for every detail to settle into place. The soft glow of the chandelier reflecting off the polished table, the faint hum of distant conversation weaving in and out like background noise that no longer mattered, and Richard remained still, his hand resting near the document but no longer reaching for it, his posture no longer commanding but measured, as if recalculating something deeper than numbers. Across from him, his partner leaned back slightly, exhaling through parted lips, the realization now fully formed in his expression, while the attorney lowered his gaze again, scanning the clause one more time, slower, quieter, not to confirm it, but to understand how it had been missed. The weight of it all did not explode. It settled, heavy and undeniable, pressing into the space between them, turning what had been a confident transaction into something far more fragile. Ava stood near the edge of the dining area, the tray now empty in her hands, her fingers resting lightly along its edge, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, as if she had already stepped beyond the moment even while still physically inside it, the light catching the subtle movement of her chest as she inhaled, exhaled, calm in a way that did not demand recognition. A faint reflection of her figure appeared in the glass wall beside her, doubling her presence without amplifying it. Quiet, grounded, real. A server passed by again, this time slower, glancing briefly toward the table before continuing, sensing the shift but not interfering with it, while the low music continued overhead, its rhythm unchanged, almost indifferent to the tension unfolding beneath it. Richard's gaze drifted once more, not sharply, not deliberately, but inevitably, landing on Ava again, and this time it lingered just a fraction longer, not as a challenge, not as dismissal, but as acknowledgement forming in real time, subtle and incomplete, yet unmistakable. His fingers finally moved, not toward the pen, but away from it, sliding it a few inches to the side as if removing the possibility of an immediate decision, creating space where there had been none before. His shoulders lowered slightly, not in defeat, but in release, the quiet acceptance that the moment had shifted beyond his initial control. The attorney cleared his throat softly, as if preparing to speak, then stopped, recognizing that explanation would not restore what had already been revealed, and the partner remained silent, his earlier confidence replaced by careful observation. The room, though still filled with people, felt distant around them. The table now its own contained world, defined by a single truth that had surfaced without force, without volume, but with undeniable precision. Ava adjusted her grip on the tray, a small movement, almost imperceptible, then turned slightly toward the service corridor, not rushing, not hesitating, simply moving forward as if the moment did not belong to her to hold on to, as if her role had been to see, to speak, and then to let the rest unfold without her. And behind her, Richard watched, not calling out, not interrupting, but not looking away either, the silence between them carrying more weight than any words could have, as the realization settled fully into place, quiet, complete, and impossible to ignore. Wait. The word did not rise above the music, but it carried enough weight to stop her step before it fully landed, and Ava paused just at the edge of the service corridor, the soft glow of the hallway light meeting the warmer tones of the dining room behind her, creating a quiet line she had almost crossed. She turned slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the voice without stepping back into the space she had already begun to leave. And Richard was already standing, the subtle shift of his chair marking the movement more than the sound itself. His posture no longer relaxed, no longer distant, but engaged in a way that had not been there before. The table behind him remained untouched, the document still open, the pen still set aside, the decision still suspended. His partner watched him closely, the earlier confidence replaced by curiosity, while the attorney lowered his gaze, understanding without needing to be told that the moment had moved beyond legal explanation. Richard took a step forward, measured, deliberate, closing a small portion of the distance without rushing it, his eyes fixed on Ava, not with the authority he had carried earlier, but with something quieter, more precise. You saw it immediately, he said, not as an accusation, not even as a question, but as a statement that carried its own realization. And Ava held his gaze, her expression steady, her posture unchanged, the tray still resting lightly in her hands as if grounding her in something simple and real. I have seen clauses like that before, she replied, her voice calm, even, offering no more than what was necessary. And yet the words carried weight, history, experience that did not match the role she wore in that moment. Richard's brow tightened slightly, not in doubt, but in recognition of the gap between what he had assumed and what now stood in front of him. And he glanced briefly back at the table, at the document that had nearly been signed, then back at her again, the connection clearer now, sharper. You work here, he said, the statement incomplete, as if waiting for something to fill the space behind it. And Ava gave a small nod, not defensive, not explanatory, just acknowledging the obvious without defining herself by it. The silence between them shifted again, no longer tense, but searching, as if something unspoken was moving just beneath the surface, waiting to be recognized. Richard exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just enough to release the last trace of the posture he had carried when the evening began, and for a moment, he did not speak, allowing the realization to settle fully, not rushed, not forced. Then his voice came again, quieter now, more direct. You may have just saved me from a mistake I would not have seen until it was too late. And the words did not echo outward. They stayed between them, contained, deliberate. Ava did not react with surprise, did not step forward or back. She simply held the moment with the same calm she had carried from the beginning, her eyes steady, her presence unchanged, as if the acknowledgement did not alter who she was, only what had been revealed. Behind them, the restaurant continued, conversations rebuilding, glasses clinking softly, life moving forward as if nothing had shifted, Yet for those at that table, and in that narrow space between where she stood and where he had stepped, everything had already changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that could not be undone. Richard did not move immediately after speaking, as if the words themselves needed a moment to settle into something real, something irreversible, and the space between him and Ava held that silence with a quiet gravity that neither of them rushed to break. The light from the dining room softened as it stretched toward the corridor behind her, outlining her figure in a way that made her presence feel both grounded and distant at the same time. And she shifted the tray slightly in her hands. A small, natural movement that reminded the moment of its simplicity even as everything around it felt anything but simple. Richard took another step forward, slower this time, not closing the distance entirely, but enough to make the intention clear, his posture no longer carrying the edge of authority, but something closer to humility, unfamiliar and unpolished. "I misjudged you," he said, the words measured, not forced, but not easy either, each one placed carefully as if they carried more weight than he was used to giving them. And he did not look away after saying it, did not soften it with a smile or dilute it with justification. He simply let it stand. Ava's eyes held his for a moment longer, steady, calm, the same quiet strength that had guided her from the beginning still present, unchanged by the shift in tone, unchanged by the recognition now forming in front of her, and she gave a small nod, not accepting or rejecting the apology, but acknowledging it as something said. Behind him, his partner leaned back fully now, arms resting on the chair, watching with a kind of silence that carried its own understanding, while the attorney remained still, hands folded lightly, aware that whatever had been overlooked in the document was no longer the only thing being examined. Richard glanced briefly over his shoulder at the table, at the open pages that had nearly defined the night, then back to Ava. The connection between the two moments clear in his expression. "You did not have to say anything," he added, quieter now, and there was something different in that statement, not a question, but a recognition of choice, of the fact that she had stepped beyond expectation for reasons that had nothing to do with him. Ava shifted her weight slightly, the soft sound of her shoes against the floor barely noticeable, her voice calm when she answered. "I saw something that was not right," she said, simple, direct, leaving no space for anything else to complicate it. And in that simplicity, the contrast between them sharpened, not in opposition, but in clarity. Richard's expression tightened for a brief second, not with discomfort, but with understanding, the kind that does not arrive all at once, but unfolds quietly, piece by piece. And he gave a small nod of his own, more to himself than to her, as if accepting something he had not expected to confront. The restaurant moved around them again, more fully now, the earlier pause dissolving into the rhythm of the evening. Yet the space they occupied remained distinct, defined by what had just passed between them. Richard stepped back slightly, not retreating, but creating space. Again, this time intentionally, his voice steady when he spoke once more. "Thank you," he said. And this time there was no edge, no distance, only the acknowledgement itself, clear and unguarded. Ava held his gaze for one final moment, then inclined her head slightly, a gesture that was neither formal nor dismissive, simply complete, and she turned again toward the corridor, her steps quiet, unhurried, moving forward without looking back, while Richard remained where he was, watching just long enough to understand that some moments did not require anything more, that some truths, once seen, did not need to be spoken again, only carried forward in the silence that followed. The corridor swallowed the sound of her footsteps almost immediately, the soft echo fading into the muted rhythm of the service area, leaving behind a stillness that felt more deliberate than before, and Richard remained where he stood, not because he had nowhere to go, but because something in the moment had not finished settling. The dining room continued around him, voices rising and falling, glasses touching lightly, the low music threading through it all as if nothing had shifted, yet the table behind him told a different story, the untouched plate, the open document, the pen resting to the side like a decision that had been paused rather than made. He turned slowly, his gaze moving back to the paper, but this time it did not hold the same authority. It did not command his attention the way it had earlier. Instead it sat there, exposed, its meaning fully understood, its illusion gone. His partner watched him carefully, saying nothing, understanding that whatever had just happened did not need to be filled with conversation. While the attorney adjusted his posture again, quieter now, more aware of the limits of precision when certainty is assumed too quickly, Richard stepped back toward the table, his hand brushing lightly against the back of the chair before he sat down, not with the ease he had earlier, but with intention, as if the act itself marked a shift from one version of the evening to another. He looked once more at the clause, then closed the document gently, not out of frustration, not out of dismissal, but out of clarity. The decision no longer suspended, but redirected entirely. The pen remained where it was, untouched, its absence from his hand more meaningful than any signature could have been. Across the room, a faint reflection in the glass caught the last glimpse of Ava as she moved deeper into the corridor, her figure blending into the quiet flow of the staff, becoming part of the background once more, not elevated, not announced, simply returning to where she had always been seen, yet no longer the same in the way he understood her. Richard leaned back slightly, his eyes lifting from the table, not searching for her now, but carrying the awareness she had left behind, something quieter than gratitude, something steadier than surprise. His partner finally exhaled, a small release of tension, and reached for his glass, while the attorney gathered the papers with a more careful hand, as if every line now required a second look. The restaurant. Lights reflected softly across the polished surfaces, the evening continuing, unchanged for most, but for one table, for one moment, the balance had shifted in a way that would not return to what it had been. Richard rested his hand briefly on the closed document, then removed it, leaving it there without ownership, without urgency, and in that simple gesture, the silence spoke louder than anything that had been said, carrying